Ever feel like you're just drowning in all this health advice? Like everyone's got the secret to living longer, but well, it's a lot to sift through.
Right. It's a jungle out there.
Exactly. So that's where we come in. Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we do the heavy lifting for you.
We take a ton of info, all the latest research, maybe even that book on your bedside table that you haven't quite gotten to, and we boil it all down, just the stuff you really need.
No more information overload.
Yeah.
Just the good stuff. The game changers.
That's the goal.
And for today's deep dive, we're cracking open Outlive, the science and art of longevity.
We're going to pull out the really key ideas, the ones that can help you not just live longer, but live better longer.
That's the health span part, the quality of those years. Can't forget about that.
Absolutely.
Now, the author of this book, he's got a really interesting story. He used to be a surgical resident.
Wow.
Yeah, and he had this recurring dream, vivid dream. He was trying to catch all these falling eggs.
Falling eggs.
Falling eggs, and each one represents a patient dying from a chronic disease. It really got to him, you know. He felt like traditional medicine was always on the back foot, always reacting.
Always a step behind.
Yeah, and that's what kind of pushed him to think differently, to be more proactive about health. And that's what we're going to unpack today.
Makes sense.
So one of the big ideas in the book is what the author calls the 4 horsemen.
4 horsemen.
4 horsemen of chronic aging diseases. These are the heavy hitters: heart disease, cancer,
Oh, yeah.
neurodegenerative diseases, things like Alzheimer's,
Right.
and then type 2 diabetes.
Which kind of goes hand in hand with metabolic dysfunction.
Yeah, big problem.
Huge. And these are the things we really got to focus on. The author even calls it slow death, because it's not just about getting sick, it's about how those diseases impact your life over time.
It's about the long game.
Exactly.
And, you know, we keep saying longevity,
Right.
but it's not just about adding years to your life.
No, it's got to be about the quality of those years, too.
That's the health span, folks. How well are you living, not just how long? So let's dive in. What's the first big concept we should tackle?
Well, the book talks about this idea of medicine 2.0 versus medicine 3.0. It's a really interesting way to frame it.
Okay, so medicine 2.0. That sounds kind of like the traditional way we think about healthcare, right? You get sick, you go to the doctor, they fix you.
Yeah, it's very reactive. You know, think about someone who's been in a car accident. They rush to the ER, the doctors stop the bleeding, stabilize the patient.
It's an emergency response.
Exactly. And in a way, medicine 2.0 often approaches chronic diseases the same way. Waits till things are really bad before jumping in.
Okay, so what's medicine 3.0 then? Sounds like something from a sci-fi movie.
It kind of is in a good way, though. It's all about being proactive, personalized, really looking at the evidence.
So less about treating sickness and more about preventing it in the first place.
You got it. It's about understanding what causes these diseases and intervening early, way before you even have symptoms.
I like that. It's like taking control, you know.
Absolutely. And the book uses this analogy. I think it's a good one.
Let's hear it.
It compares older medicine to, well, taping bricks to a gas pedal.
Taping brakes.
Like trying to force things to work better without really understanding the mechanisms, without the right tools.
Kind of makes sense. We've come a long way since then, though, right?
Oh, yeah. We've got so much more knowledge now, so much better technology. It's like having a self-driving car instead of just a clunky old car.
Self-driving car, so we can actually steer clear of the dangers, the icebergs, so to speak.
Exactly. We have the data, the AI, the computing power to navigate the complexities of health in a much more sophisticated way.
And that brings up risk, right? Medicine 2.0, it's all about do no harm, which is obviously important.
It's super important.
But medicine 3.0, it takes a different perspective. It's more about understanding and managing risk over the long term.
And that's fascinating because sometimes not doing anything can actually be the riskier choice.
You mean like waiting till a problem gets really bad before doing something about it?
Precisely. With medicine 3.0, you're analyzing the potential risks and benefits, maybe even taking action early on, even if there's a small risk involved.
Because you're playing the long game.
You got it. You're trying to prevent a much bigger problem down the road.
It's like strategic healthcare, you know?
That's a good way to put it.
Now, the book also talks about this historical progression of medicine. Like, we had the scientific revolution, that's like medicine 1.0.
Right, laying the groundwork.
Then came evidence-based medicine, that's medicine 2.0. Rigorous testing,
Yeah.
figuring out what actually works.
And now it feels like we're on the brink of this medicine 3.0, the personalized preventative stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the book makes this comparison to the Titanic, which is, well, A little bit sobering.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
They knew there were icebergs out there, but they were basically reacting to what was right in front of them, hoping for the best.
Didn't work out so well for them. Not at all. And it's like, today we have radar, GPS, all this tech that lets us see the dangers ahead of time, and that's what Medicine 3.0 is trying to do for healthcare.
Give us a heads up so we can change course.
Exactly. But, there's a catch. This Medicine 3.0, it demands a lot more from us, the patients.
From us, you mean, from the listener?
Yes, from you guys. It means being informed, really understanding your own health data, knowing what your goals are, and being willing to make changes. It's not just about passively taking a pill.
You have to be an active participant in your own health.
You got it. So understanding this shift, this move from reactive to proactive, it's a big deal. It's empowering. It puts you in the driver's seat.
So the whole point of all this is to live longer, but not just that, right? We want to live those extra years to the fullest.
Exactly. We want to maximize our health span, not just our lifespan.
Yeah.
And maybe even exceed our expected life expectancy, but, do it in style.
Living it up.
Right. Now, the book talks about this concept called the marginal decade. Medicine 2.0, it's done a pretty good job of extending lifespan, but sometimes those extra years, well, they come with a lot of health problems.
Increased morbidity.
Yeah, that's the term. Basically, it means you're living longer, but you're sick or disabled for a good chunk of that time.
And the author shares a story about one of his patients who lived a long life, but really suffered in those last few years.
Yeah, it's a powerful reminder that it's not just about quantity, it's about quality. It's about having the capacity to enjoy those extra years.
It's like that gradual decline we all experience as we age. You start to lose a bit of your strength, your flexibility, your energy. And Medicine 2.0 often waits until things are pretty far gone before stepping in.
Yeah, it's playing catch-up. But Medicine 3.0, it wants to rewrite that story. The goal is to keep your health span strong, maybe even improve it as you get older. So, you're hitting your 50s, 60s, 70s, and you're still feeling vibrant, energetic, sharp as a tack.
Like you're younger than your actual age.
Exactly. And that's where you guys come in, the listeners. Thinking about your fitness goals now, what do you want to be able to do in your later years? What's important to you?
And it's not about chasing some quick fix, right?
This is about becoming a master strategist for your own health.
Master strategist. I like that.
It's about understanding the big picture, the things that drive aging, the 4 horsemen, and then coming up with a long-term plan, not just reacting to symptoms as they pop up.
So think ahead, people. Plan for the future.
Right on. Now, the book breaks down the 2 main areas where we see decline as we age. Cognitive ability, that's your thinking, memory, all that. And then physical capability, your strength, balance, all the things that let you move freely.
And sometimes one goes before the other, sometimes it's both at the same time.
Yep, it varies. But the goal is to slow that decline down as much as possible in both areas.
And for the physical part, the book talks about this centenarian decathlon. Sounds intense.
It's not a real competition, though, don't worry. Although it's pretty amazing what some centenarians can do. Have you seen those senior games?
Incredible, yeah.
So this decathlon, it's more like a thought experiment. It's about defining what you want to be able to do physically in your 80s, 90s, even beyond. Simple things like lifting a suitcase, maintaining your balance, climbing stairs.
Things that most of us take for granted right now.
Right, but we lose those abilities if we don't actively work to keep them.
Use it or lose it, as they say.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what do you want to be able to do when you're 100? That's the question.
Good question. And to get there, the book emphasizes focusing on specific components of fitness.
Right. It's not just about being active in general. You got to break it down. Strength, stability, aerobic efficiency, and your VO2 max, which is your peak aerobic capacity.
Okay, so lots to think about.
Lots to think about, lots to do. But it's worth it, right? I mean, who doesn't want to be a fit, healthy centenarian?
Sign me up. Now, the book also dives into what longevity research tells us, and it starts with those centenarians.
Right, those folks who live past 100. And the author makes a really good point here. It's tough to draw definitive conclusions from studying them.
Because a lot of the information is anecdotal, right? Like, oh, I always had a glass of red wine before bed.
Exactly. And maybe that helped, maybe it didn't. It's hard to say for sure. Plus, you got to watch out for survivorship bias. Like the people who make it to 100, they might just be outliers. They might have some quirky habits, but that doesn't mean those habits are the reason they live so long.
Makes sense. But there is some interesting research on longevity genes, right?
Oh, yeah. There are a few genes that pop up consistently in populations known for their longevity.
Like APOE.
Yep, APOE is a big one. It's involved in cholesterol metabolism, glucose metabolism, even Alzheimer's risk. Different versions of the gene can have different effects.
So some people might have a genetic advantage when it comes to longevity.
Potentially, but it's not a guarantee. It's all about how your genes interact with your environment and your lifestyle.
Nature and nurture working together.
Exactly. And then there's another gene, FOXO3, that seems to be important for cellular maintenance and repair.
So like a quality control system for your cells.
Exactly. And that's key because the better your cells function, the longer you're likely to live.
Makes sense.
But even if you don't have those golden genes, you can still make a huge impact on your longevity through your lifestyle choices.
Like what you eat, how much you exercise, how well you sleep, all that good stuff.
All of it matters. And it's never too late to start making changes.
So let's talk about some of the more specific interventions that the book explores. What about rapamycin?
Oh, yeah, rapamycin. That's a fascinating one. It's a compound originally found in soil samples from Easter Island.
Easter Island, that's where those giant statues are, right?
The Moai, yep. Anyway, rapamycin has been shown to extend lifespan in several animal models.
Really? How does it work?
It seems to inhibit a pathway called mTR, which is involved in cell growth and metabolism, and it's linked to another big area of longevity research, caloric restriction.
So eating less can help you live longer.
Essentially, yes. Reducing calorie intake, without being malnourished, of course, has been shown to extend lifespan across a whole range of species.
Wow. And how is that connected to mTOR?
Well, caloric restriction seems to activate a different pathway, AMPK, which is like a cellular fuel gauge. It promotes energy efficiency and resilience, and it also inhibits mTOR.
So it's like putting your body in a slightly stressed state, which triggers these protective mechanisms.
Yeah, that's the idea. It's like giving your cells a little bit of a challenge, and they respond by becoming stronger and more resilient.
Makes sense. Now, the book also talks about this crisis of abundance, which is a pretty provocative title.
It is, and it's a real issue. Basically, our genes evolved in environments where food was scarce and we had to work hard to get it.
Back in the hunter-gatherer days.
Exactly. But now we're surrounded by an overabundance of calorie-dense, highly processed food, and our bodies haven't quite caught up.
So we're kind of out of sync with our environment.
Big time. And that leads to a whole host of metabolic problems.
Like what?
Well, one of the big ones is non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or NAFLD. It's actually incredibly common, but a lot of people don't even realize they have it because it often doesn't have any obvious symptoms in the early stages.
Silent but deadly.
Not always deadly, but it can definitely lead to serious problems if it's not addressed. The good news is it's often reversible with lifestyle changes, especially weight loss.
The liver is pretty resilient.
It is. But here's the thing. It's not just about being overweight or obese. You can have metabolic dysfunction even if your BMI is considered normal.
So you could look healthy on the outside, but be struggling on the inside.
Precisely. And a good chunk of people who meet the criteria for metabolic syndrome, high blood pressure, high blood sugar, unhealthy cholesterol levels, they're not technically obese.
So BMI isn't the whole story.
Definitely not. And the liver, it plays a huge role in all this, especially when it comes to regulating glucose.
Glucose, that's blood sugar, right?
Right. And the book explains how insulin resistance develops, often starting with inactivity in the muscles. Basically, your cells become less responsive to insulin, which is the hormone that helps your body use glucose for energy.
So the glucose builds up in your blood, and that's bad news.
Yep. It can lead to all sorts of problems, including type 2 diabetes.
And speaking of diabetes, the book connects its rise to our modern diet, specifically our increased consumption of fructose.
Fructose, the sugar in fruit.
Yeah, and high fructose corn syrup, which is everywhere these days.
Right. And humans, we've got this unique metabolic pathway that lets us convert fructose directly into fat.
Really? Why is that?
It's an evolutionary quirk. Our primate ancestors lost the gene for an enzyme called uricase, which breaks down uric acid. So when we eat fructose, we produce more uric acid, which promotes fat storage.
So a genetic adaptation that might have helped our ancestors survive famine is now working against us.
Exactly. It's a classic example of how our genes haven't quite caught up to our modern environment.
Fascinating, but a bit frustrating too.
It is. Okay, let's move on to the heart, the ticker.
Heart disease, the big one.
Still the leading cause of death worldwide, but the good news is it's largely preventable.
That's good to hear. But how does it develop in the first place?
Well, it all starts with atherosclerosis, which is the buildup of plaque in the arteries, and that starts with damage to the endothelium, which is the inner lining of the arteries.
So it's like the plumbing gets clogged up.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. And then you have these ApoB-containing lipoproteins like LDL and VLDL, which carry cholesterol and other fats around the body.
And those are the bad guys, right?
Well, it's not quite that simple. It's not just about good HDL and bad LDL cholesterol. What really matters is the number of ApoB particles in your bloodstream over time.
So the more of those particles you have, the higher your risk of developing heart disease.
Exactly. And the book talks about some advanced detection methods like CT angiography, which can actually visualize the plaque buildup in the arteries.
So you can see the problem before it becomes a major issue.
Right. And to illustrate that point, the author shares some personal stories. There's Not Thin Peter, who wasn't obese but had significant metabolic issues, and Anahad O'Connor, who discovered he had elevated levels of a particularly risky type of lipoprotein called LPA.
So even if you think you're healthy, it's worth getting checked out.
Absolutely. And these stories also highlight the limitations of Medicine 2.0. It often relies on a simplistic view of cholesterol and might not have aggressive enough targets for lowering those ApoB levels. The book argues that we should aim for much lower levels, more like what you see in healthy children.
So back to the basics.
In a way, yeah. And when it comes to preventing heart disease, the book emphasizes dietary changes, like shifting towards healthier fats.
Less saturated fat, more unsaturated fat.
Right. And then there are medications like statins, which can help lower LDL cholesterol.
But the key takeaway here is that Medicine 3.0 isn't just about managing risk. It's about addressing the root cause, those ApoB particles.
That's the big shift. Okay, ready to tackle cancer.
Bring it on.
All right, so cancer. The book calls it the runaway cell, which I think is a pretty apt description.
Because cancer cells, they just keep dividing uncontrollably.
Exactly. And the book highlights two major challenges when it comes to treating cancer.
What are those?
First, cancer cells have a completely different metabolism than normal cells. They go through this process called the Warburg effect, where they primarily use glucose for energy, even when oxygen is available.
So they're basically sugar addicts.
Big time. And that's actually a potential target for new therapies. The second challenge is that cancer cells are really good at evading the immune system.
So our bodies don't always recognize them as a threat.
Exactly. And the book talks about the link between obesity, diabetes, inflammation, and an increased risk of cancer.
So all those things we've been talking about, they all contribute to a higher risk.
They do, and there's some evidence suggesting that interventions like caloric restriction or fasting mimicking diets, which lower insulin levels, might slow down cancer growth.
Interesting. And there's a lot of buzz around immunotherapy these days, right?
Oh yeah, immunotherapy is a big deal. The book talks about CAR T cell therapy, where they basically reprogram your own immune cells to attack the cancer.
That's amazing.
It is, and it's had some incredible successes,
Right.
but it's not without its risks and limitations.
There's another type of immunotherapy called checkpoint inhibitors, right?
Right. Those work by essentially taking the brakes off the immune system so it can recognize and attack the cancer cells more effectively.
So kind of like unleashing the hounds.
In a way, yeah. And the author shares a story about his friend Michael, who was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and successfully treated with immunotherapy.
Pancreatic cancer, that's one of the toughest ones to beat.
It is. And Michael's story is really inspiring, but it also highlights the potential side effects of immunotherapy. He actually developed type 1 diabetes as a result of the treatment.
Wow. So there's still a lot to learn about these new therapies.
Definitely. But the progress is really encouraging. And the book also talks about another promising approach called adoptive cell transfer, where they take your own immune cells, modify them in the lab to target your specific tumor, and then reintroduce them into your body.
So it's personalized cancer therapy.
Exactly. But here's the thing. The book really hammers home the importance of early detection.
Catch it early. Treat it early.
Exactly. The survival rates for cancers detected early are dramatically higher than for cancers that have already spread.
And there are some new technologies that are helping with early detection, right?
Yeah, like multiparametric MRI for prostate cancer, colonoscopy for colorectal cancer, and liquid biopsies, which involve analyzing your blood for signs of cancer.
That's incredible. So we're getting better at finding these cancers before they become a major problem.
We are, and that's a huge step forward. All right, ready to dive into the brain?
Let's do it.
Okay, so we're talking about chasing memory, Alzheimer's disease, and other neurodegenerative diseases.
These are some of the scariest ones, I think, because they affect our minds, our identities.
They do, and unfortunately, Medicine 2.0 doesn't have much to offer once these diseases take hold, so prevention is absolutely key.
Medicine 3.0 to the rescue, hopefully.
That's the hope. Now, there's been a lot of research on amyloid plaques and tau tangles in the brain, which have traditionally been considered the hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease.
Right, I've heard about those.
But it turns out it's not quite that simple. Having amyloid plaques doesn't necessarily mean you'll develop Alzheimer's, and some people with the disease don't have a lot of plaques.
So there's more to the story than we originally thought.
Definitely. And the author shares a story about a woman named Stephanie who got tested for the APOE4 gene, which increases the risk of Alzheimer's.
That's the same gene we talked about earlier, right?
Yep. And for Stephanie, knowing her genetic risk motivated her to take steps to reduce her overall risk, like adopting a healthier lifestyle.
So knowledge is power.
It can be. And the book talks about some interventions that have shown promise, like the Birdsen protocol, which involves a multifaceted approach targeting various risk factors.
So it's not just one thing, it's a whole lifestyle overhaul.
Right. And there's also the Finnish finger study, which showed that a combination of diet, exercise, cognitive training, and vascular risk monitoring could improve cognitive function in older adults.
So there's hope. We're not just sitting ducks.
Absolutely not. And the book introduces these concepts of cognitive reserve and movement reserve.
What are those?
Well, the idea is that engaging in mentally stimulating activities and getting regular exercise can build up a sort of buffer in your brain.
So even if you have some of the underlying pathology of Alzheimer's, you might not experience symptoms as early or as severely.
That's the idea. And the book also talks about some other risk factors for cognitive decline, like reduced blood flow to the brain, insulin resistance, high blood sugar, poor sleep, and even certain types of oral bacteria.
Wow, so it's a whole system thing.
It is. But there's one thing that really stands out as a powerful preventative measure, and that's exercise.
Good old exercise.
Yep. Aiming for at least 4 sessions a week, about 20 minutes each, at a decent intensity, can make a huge difference.
So get moving, people. Your brain will thank you.
It will. Okay, we're in the home stretch now.
Almost there.
The last section of the book is called Thinking Tactically, and it's all about putting these principles into action.
From theory to practice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the book uses this analogy of driving through a dangerous intersection.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
So you're approaching the intersection and you're aware of the potential dangers.
Cars coming from all directions.
Right. And you need to have a strategy, a plan for navigating through safely.
So you check your mirrors, look both ways, signal, all that.
Exactly.
Right.
In this analogy, the accidents are the chronic diseases of aging, the 4 horsemen.
And we're trying to avoid those accidents by being proactive, making smart choices.
Exactly. And here's the thing. Our genes haven't changed much over the last few thousand years, but our environment has changed dramatically.
We're not living in the savannah anymore.
And this mismatch is a major contributor to the rise in chronic diseases.
So we have to be even more deliberate about the choices we make.
We do. We have to take control of our health destiny, and that's what Medicine 3.0 is all about.
It's about empowerment.
Absolutely. And the book's title, Outlive, it perfectly captures the goal, right? It's not just about living longer, it's about living better for longer.
Rewriting the story of aging.
Exactly. Making each decade healthier and more vibrant than the last.
I love that.
And that's what we've been talking about today. The principles, the strategies, the tools that can help you do just that. And honestly, we've only scratched the surface of what's in the book. There's so much more to explore.
So if you're interested, definitely pick up a copy of Outlive.
It's a good one. Now, before we wrap up, we want to leave you with something to think about.
A little homework.
Exactly. What part of today's conversation resonated with you the most? What's one small change you could make in your life, starting today, to move towards a longer, healthier life?
Maybe it's something related to your diet or your exercise routine or your sleep habits.
Whatever it is, take action. Make a commitment. You have the power to shape your own health destiny.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Outlive, the science and art of longevity. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay healthy.
Yeah.